Alright, I'm going to do a brief video, talk a little bit about Tyranids, and some ideas, some thoughts about them. I know the internet is just overrun with people who are disgruntled with the Tyranid Codex and are selling their armies and quitting and whatever their choice are. But I personally don't think it's a terrible codex. Certainly there are more powerful ones, but that doesn't make it useless. We'll run through it. I'll give some ideas. I'm not going to do a unit-by-unit breakdown or anything like that, but I'll talk about what I think is at least some thoughts, some ideas, things that might work or might not. Should point out, I'm going to try not to say, in the old codex, because I think the way to look at this new codex is it's a new codex. Don't look at it as a Tyranids 6.0. Look at it as Codex Tyranids. Don't look at it as an upgrade or a change to the previous one. Just it's a new codex, and you have what you have in it. And I would just point out that I did own Tyranids a long time ago. They were my third army. Started with Necrons, and I sold Necrons after they came out with their new codex because I didn't like the fluff. And I didn't really like the way it played, even though everyone probably is very well aware that it's a highly competitive codex. So anyways, I sold my Tyranids a long time ago, and then I bought new ones and restarted an army. And when this codex came out, I read through it and have some ideas, and we'll see how it goes. And to start with, 40k is a game. It's a game, and so your goal, is twofold. Obviously, you're playing it to have fun, and then it's a game, so you're trying to win. At least you're trying to win often enough to make it fun for you. But not. I don't think most people like playing armies that always win, unless that's just what they play for. But it gets kind of boring when you just always win with the same kind of ridiculous build. I don't see too many people at gaming clubs playing double Force Org 5 or 6 Helldrakes, just because no one wants to play against you, and it's not much fun. So let's talk about Tyranids and how to win with them, or at least things to think about in order to really boost the chance of having some sort of victory. First thing to realize is that Tyranids have a special rule called instinctive behavior, and this could just really hammer you in terms of late game in particular, losing. So one thing to note is that one of your troops, Gene Stealers, don't have it. They don't have instinctive behavior, so you don't ever have to roll for them. Unfortunately, they may not be the best troops in the game, but it's worth noting that if you're worried about instinctive behavior, not everyone has it. The other thing to note is that it doesn't always go off. If you're in Synapse, obviously there's no instinctive behavior, but the other big thing to note is that if you've gone to ground or if you're in close combat, you don't have to roll for instinctive behavior. And this could be really useful, because let's say you're playing Termagants or something that could run off the board because of its instinctive behavior. If they go to ground while being shot, and they're not in Synapse, they can't go to ground when they're in Synapse, that saves them for a whole round of instinctive behavior. If you've gone to ground, you're pinned, you're not rolling instinctive behavior. Shadow in the Warp. This power really got better, I think. It used to be that it made Psychers roll 3d6. Oh, I just said used to be. Well, it takes off your enemy Psychers' leadership. It doesn't say for psychic tests, it says off their leadership. Now, this might interact with Stubborn, so a few characters like Codius, they're unaffected, but most of the other ones, it's taken off their leadership, which means, they fail combat, they're likely to run, they taken pinning tests or something like that, their leadership's going to go down. Synapse creatures, it's important to note which of your units have Synapse, and I think for winning the game, it's important to have Synapse creatures embedded in your army, scattered around the board so that you can really support your units. What's really important, though, is to look at your units on the board and say, hey, if I'm not in Synapse, which units really suffer from this? Used to be there were actually units you didn't want to have in Synapse. I almost never wanted my Ormagants to be in Synapse because I wanted them to have rage. Now, that's unlikely. I think Ormagants not in Synapse is a fatal mistake. So you want to look and say, hey, if my unit has Hunt and it's just going to go to ground, is that bad? Is it going to be holding or denying an objective? Because if that's the case, maybe I don't really care if it's in Synapse late in the game. Is it going to lurk, in which case it's going to run off the board? If it's fearless, then I might not care as much if it's lurking, because it might be denying an objective. It can still get assaulted and be in close combat. It just can't do the assault itself. So there's things to think about. The feed is the really dangerous one, because you inflict hits against yourself on about half of the rolls on the instinctive behavior, but that can't happen if you're fearless. So monstrous creatures with feed, for example, they're fearless anyways. I think most of them are. So they're not going to kill themselves. Or if it's just one individual, it's a lone individual, he can't hit himself, so he's not suffering from it. So feed is really going to punish you with your troops. Your Ormagants with feed could actually wipe themselves out. So the way I see the Tyranids is you could do several builds, and some of these are going to be a competitive against most armies. Some of them are going to be competitive only against a select range of armies. So if you look at the Tyranids and you look at their units, which their force org chart and who you can take, you obviously can't take allies. You can't even ally with other Tyranids. But what are some builds you could do? Well, one of the options is to take an army that can assault on round 1. Now, I know someone on the internet's going to say, you can't do that. It says in the rules you can't. Well, I can't find that in the rules. The only thing I can find are that scouts and infiltrators cannot assault on turn 1. But if you look at page 9 of the rule book, it says when it says turn, it means player turn. So if you scout and infiltrate and you go second, you could assault on round 1. And if you infiltrate, you could potentially be 12 inches away from your opponent if you don't have line of sight, or 18. 18 makes it hard to charge if they don't move forward. But if you're 12 inches away, that's a 6-inch charge if you clear that 12-inch distance on your move. So who can infiltrate? I think one of the options, if you're making an infiltrating assault army, is you can take Death Leaper. This is an old Lictor, so I use him as my Death Leaper. He's at HQ, he infiltrates, and he's really hard to kill because you can't hit him with flamers, you can't hit him with blasts. Well, you can hit him, you can't target him with them, because you can only snap fire at him. And you can take Gene Stealers. Yeah, Gene Stealers, as troops, most people will tell you, well, these aren't very good. They have piss poor saves, and they cost too much. I'm not sure that's true. If you take a large number of squads, you can take minimum size squads, which makes shooting at them less effective. Maybe you can shoot down a couple squads, but if each squad is small, you end up wasting extra shots. And if you string them outright when they infiltrate in, you could put them near a Venomthrope who sits on your deployment line. So you might be able to give them a pretty solid cover save, at least a 3-up if they're in terrain. It may be a 2-up if they're in ruins. So these guys, if you take 5 or 6 squads of Gene Stealers and the Death Leaper and some Lictors, you could have an army which is in your opponent's deployment zone, scattered about, and ready to assault on round 1. It's going to take losses at the beginning because your opponent, you want them to go first. They're going to shoot them. But if you got enough squads out there, you can lock stuff down and then move in your other heavy hitters. And for that, I would think you probably want your fast, hard-moving units. So Flying Hive Tyrant as your other Warlord. And if you're doing only a single Force Org, then that would be Death Leaper and Flying Hive Tyrant. But if you're doing double Force Org, you could take 2 Flying Tyrants. I'm not sure I would do that, but and then take things like Gargoyles. I don't know about Raveners, because they still tend to die. But they move 12 inches. You could take your flying monstrous creatures, things that can get there really quickly, and have them up there. Other thing to note for this is that you can take fortifications. I don't see anything in the rules that say you can't as Tyranids. So you take an Aegis defense line or two and string them up on your deployment line if you want, so that you can put troops behind it with some Venom Thropes there to give them Shrouded, so that they can be into your opponent's deployment zone on round 2. And it's important, if your opponent focuses on killing those Gene Stealers and Lictors who could assault them on round 1, then potentially they've forgotten to deal with what's coming in on round 2, those other units that are behind that Aegis line, because those might do some serious damage. And something like Ormagaunt's there, as long as they start in Synapse, or they're in Synapse, then they're potentially pretty solid. So one build, an all-close combat build that's there. I think when you do this, though, you have to remember you have to have scoring units in the game, and you're going to want something in your deployment zone, at least one troop choice that doesn't assault and is holding objectives. Gene Stealers don't have Synapse. Well, they have Synapse, but they don't have instinctive behavior, so they're okay in your opponent's deployment zone. I think something like Tervagant's just sitting on an objective and a Tyranid Prime would be useful in your own zone. So other builds, you can take the Monstrous Creature build. Every Force Org slot in the Codex can take Monstrous Creatures. That build, so I play Demons. I have played the all Monstrous Creature builds. They're cool, but they have some serious problems because you just don't have many models on the board, and so you suffer from volley, just number of shots hitting you. So it can be devastating against certain armies, but it's not a build that will take everything. You can take a lot of flying monstrous creatures, and they're harder to hit, even for units that have Skyfire. They may not have the range or whatnot, but the monstrous creature build is something you can clearly do for Tyranids. The other things to do is you can take the Typhus Zombie Blob. Something that Chaos does very well is to take cultists who are zombies. They're fearless and they just sit on objectives. Well, Tyranids can take Tervagants. You can embed a Tyranid Prime or 2 in gigantic squads of 30, and they're never going to run. And unless your opponent kills them all, and you should avoid that by putting them in cover, trying to give them feel no pain if you can. If they're sitting in Synapse on your end of the board holding objectives, they're almost indestructible till late in the game. And this isn't a game which, half the missions involve objectives. If we don't count Relic, more than half. You could potentially have Emperor's Will, where you just blob your side of the board and you're holding one objective, and you're going to try to take or contest your opponents, and try to avoid giving up first blood. So there's some things to think about. So I don't think they're terrible there. I think other things to think about is who you would take as your warlord. You can't take Old One Eye unless he's the only HQ choice because he has the lowest leadership, but otherwise you can take any of the choices as your warlord. And depending on how you do your build and where you think you're going to get your points, you got to really think about it. I don't think a Hive Tyrant's the way to go. They're really high target priority. Death Leaper, he's useful if your opponent has a lot of independent characters, because he scores 2 points, victory points, for every character he kills, independent character, in a challenge. But if you think about it, so he gives up 2 for 1. If he kills one guy and then dies the next round, they get Warlord. But if he can kill 2 or 3, then he can really rack up points. He is going to die, though, at some point. The other option, and I think it's a solid option, and maybe some people disagree, is to take a Tyranid Prime and keep him in your deployment zone and stuck in a large number of troops, because Primes are independent characters. They're hard to kill. They give Synapse. And they're not a bad choice. They are expensive, but I think they get some serious benefit from what they have. And on the topic of primes, I think one option in Tyranids that should be strongly considered is to take an Aegis defense line, give it a quad cannon or an Icarus las cannon, or a bastion, and take a prime and some warriors and put them in it, and give the prime the miasma cannon artifact so that you can shoot the quad gun, las cannon, maybe a venom cannon or a barb strangler, and that miasma cannon, and you can do a lot of damage if that Aegis line or bastion or other fortification as they come out is in the right spot. They have a solid ballistic skill. Same with zoanthropes. Zoanthropes have ballistic skill 4, so if you stick them on a quad gun, they can hit flyers as they come in, or they can shoot their warp lance at something else. And it doesn't say in the rules that if you have a squad of zoanthropes, and say you have 2 or 3 of them, that the warp blast, say you use the warp blast against a vehicle, it doesn't say that each one of those has to shoot. It just says you get shots per zoanthrope. So if one of them is shooting the quad gun and the others are shooting the psychic power, you don't lose psychic powers from shooting that quad gun. It gives you an extra shot from that unit, and if you're shooting at the right kind of vehicle, you can take it out with those shots. So things to think about with troops. I think all but the Rippers have uses. I think the Hormagaunts are the ones that have the biggest problem if you can't keep them in Synapse, because your Termagants, your Termagants are possibly gonna run away. They have low leadership. They have lurk, but your Hormagaunts are possibly just gonna eat themselves. So I think Termagants can be used to hold objectives, because you could make them fearless with Synapse, and if you put a prime in them, you're solid. Now, if someone can target that prime, you're in trouble. Gene Stealers, for all the complaints about them, they are a solid unit. They do have something worth noting for Tyranids. Tyranids did not have grenades before, so they had a terrible problem assaulting into cover. Usually Gene Stealers go first in combat, as do Lictors and a lot of other things, but they don't when they assault into cover. Well, now they do. Lictors have flesh hooks, Primes have potentially have flesh hooks, Carnifexes have the stingers, which is good when they go up against Thunderhammers and things. Gene Stealers do not have this, but what they do have is if you take a Broodlord, you can pin your opponent with the Horror. And it's something to think about. Tyranids have a lot of pinning weapons, and if you can pin a unit, then you strike at initiative when you charge in from cover, and they snap fire at you the next round. So, it's actually something to think about. What do you do with Tyranids? Well, it's going to be an army that not only involves Synapse, but involves synergy. Can I pin my opponent and then assault them? Can I somehow deny them from having their initiative when they sit in cover? Okay. In terms of the elites and what you get from the elite slots, and this is going to involve my preferences and what I see, but I think one of the mandatory elites for Tyranids are going to be Venomthropes. Venomthropes give Shrouded. Now, how you use that's going to be the question, because if you take a single Force Org, there's other things in the elite that you probably want. If you take double Force Org, the question is, how do I divide my Venomthropes? Because if you take them in units of more than one, then instant killing weapons that actually wound them are just going to kill them. So they get hit with missiles or exorcist missiles or las cannons. It's going to kill them flat out, take away all their wounds. So if you have 2 Venomthropes in a squad and they get hit with 2 wounds from strength 8 or 9, then both of them die. But if you take 2 Venomthropes, one in as individual squads of 1, you can put them in different places, but they count as extra kill points in the Purge of the Alien mission. I think Tyranids are really going to suffer on that mission, by the way. Okay, so I think Venomthropes are probably one of the most critical units in the Codex, because that Shrouded rule is an awesome thing to have. Yeah, there are lots of things to deny cover, but when you say I'm taking away your cover save and I'm using my ignore cover rule, you're using a lot of target priority there, so you can end up forcing your opponent to make bad decisions when they decide to waste their shots on the wrong thing with the ignores cover. So Venom Tropes, I think that's a truly critical elite. Hive Guard, I'm not actually sure they're all that important anymore. They do ignore cover and they have strength 8 and they can shoot at things they can't see, but I'm not sure that's as important as it used to be. We'll see. Lictors, I actually personally think Lictors are awesome. They went from something which was not too good to something that can infiltrate in so they can be on the board on round 1, and they allow something like a Moloch to, with precision, deep strike next to them because of their pheromone trail. So, and they don't scatter if they do deep strike, the Lictors themselves. So I think Lictors got better. They have stealth, so they're going to have a decent cover save. In Ruins, they'll be a 3-up. So they're solid in combat. I think if you take them, you're going to take more than one. Zoanthropes, they have a pretty solid psychic shooting attack. It can take out any vehicle in the game. The downside is the range, so you have to decide where am I putting them. Am I going to stick them up on my deployment line and walk them into my opponent's zone, which is high risk, but they are synapse creatures, so they're at least protecting my units, or am I going to try to bring them in through a Trigon tunnel? If you don't start them up on your deployment line, I'm not sure, with the exception of deep striking opponents, that they're all that useful. They do have their uses though, and they have a solid shooting power, and they have 2 psychic powers, per Zoanthrope brood. So there's a good chance you'll get some other useful psychic power off the Tyranid list, which could be a Force Org booster. You could get Feel No Pain. You could get Catalyst. You could get Dominion. I mean, there's a fair number of useful powers on top of that Warp Blast. The downside is if you use one of those other powers, you are not using Warp Blast, because Warp Blast is a Witchfire 2. So Zoanthropes, they could really pay off. Hard to say. Pyrovores, not useful at all. And then the big Harspex, the giant new monstrous creature, it's a cool looking model, kind of. I actually think you're not going to see it because it is a big, slow monster. If you're running the all-monster list, though, yeah, sure, you could take it. Fast attacks, Shrikes, along with Warriors, they both give Synapse. They're both, as long as you're not getting hit with missiles, meltas, las cannons, things which, frankly, you're wasting when you're shooting at Warriors or Shrikes. I mean, you're going to instant kill them, but they're better targets, probably. They give Synapse and they're fast moving, so if I wanted to do the all-assault army, I might take a Shrike Brood because I could get it in there on round 2. I could certainly give Synapse on round 1. And if my opponent starts shooting at them, they're wasting their shots on... They're not wasting, but they've chosen not to hit the Gene Stealers and the Lictors. Other things... I still think the Gargoyles are pretty good. They have had a change to their auto wound rule, but now that they have poison 6 blinding, if they choose to get 1 attack that way, which is fine, they only have 1 attack to begin with, so unless they're on the charge, they're getting their 1 attack. Take it as poison 6. If they have adrenal glands, it's their strength 4, so they're going to reroll wounds. Even if they don't wound on the 6, they're going to reroll wounds against everything toughness 4 and less. And if they hit, they don't have to do a wound. If they hit, they could blind their opponent, and that's useful even if the Gargoyles lose the combat and are wiped out. Your opponent is weapon skill 1, ballistic skill 1 for the rest of the turn until their turn, the end of their turn. So Gargoyles have the potential to really be a booster in combat if it's multiple unit combat. Gargoyles could knock your opponent down to weapon skill 1. Even if your opponent wins, he's ballistic skill 1. And they don't have to wound, they just have to hit. So I think Gargoyles have a potential to be a Force Org booster. Harpies and the Hive Crone, these have always suffered from the fact that they're lower toughness monsters creatures, but face it, they're the same as Demon Princes in terms of toughness. Yeah, you can instant kill them, but it takes a lot. You know, you have to focus on them. If you take one of them, I think in your army, they're either going to be something that your opponent ignores until it's too late, or they will draw fire away from other less impressive but potentially more devastating units. So the Harpy and the Hive Crone, both useful. Now, one of the big concerns are units with Skyfire, so things like Tau tanks and Aegis line weapons and such. Can these take one of these flyers down on a round, knock them out of the air, and then they die? It's important to note that you get Vector Strike with both of these, and Vector Strike is during the movement phase. The Interceptor is at the end of the movement phase. This is true for any flyer, but if you can kill the guy that's on the intercepting weapon or shake it as a vehicle, it's not going to shoot you down. So if you position these right, when they come flying by, they could Vector Strike the one person off the quad gun, and that quad gun can't shoot. They could shake a Tau tank if they don't pen it with strength 8, and it's not going to shoot at them. So you really have to think, how am I using these guys when you play them, and see how your opponent deploys. So I think the Harpy and the Hive Crone are okay. I actually thought they were okay in the previous Codex. You just didn't see them because they were probably better monsters. In terms of your heavy support, what do you have that's really useful? Probably everything. I know there's complaints about it, but you can do something like take a Trigon Prime and give him one of the Tyranid artifacts. So if you take a Trigon Prime and give him the Reaper, then he becomes base strength 7 shred with life drain and some other stuff. So he gets +3 to his initiative because he has Swift Strike, and then he's got shred. So if for some strange reason he fails to wound, he gets to re-roll that. And he's AP2 because he's a monstrous creature, so that's pretty awesome. I think that the Trigon Prime's actually still a pretty solid choice. I think the Carnifex, you could take him with the shooty Carnifex with the Devourers with Brain Leech Worms. If you take a big squad of them, that's a ton of shots. The downside is you got to get them within range for it to do something. The Moloch changed a lot, so now Molochs, when they deep strike in, they do these strength 6 AP2 blasts, but if they don't kill everything under the blast, then they roll again, and if they don't kill then they deviate, and then they have a deep strike mishap. So that means, you may choose to target something other than Terminators. If you're taking out squads of dudes, you're probably going to kill them all if they don't have an in-ball save. Strength 6, I probably wouldn't hit vehicles because you're unlikely to destroy the vehicle. So Moloch's changed, and I think with Lictors or Death Leaper, they get a big boost because they get deep strike with no deviation. On their own, they're still kind of a hit or miss unit that's either spectacularly cool and just slaughters or is sad. Tyrannifex has a 2-up save, and it has a torrent weapon. It's something you could take and plop him down either near your deployment line and use that acid spray and really do some damage, or he does have the potential to have a strength 10 weapon that it'll hit every round probably. He gets 2 shots, so he'll probably hit once. So you can take out almost any vehicle in the game with that, and he's a solid choice. Trigons, I think the Prime's better. Biovores are still awesome, and they drop those Spore Mines, and those Spore Mines don't count against you, and you have control of them now, so they're pretty useful. Other things to think about with the Tyranids, things we've got, we have this list of bio artifacts. I think everyone's talked about the Norn Crown. It boosts your synapse by 6 inches. It's an expensive artifact. It's probably worth taking on someone who's not going to die and is in a critical spot. The Miasma Cannon, I think this one's going to be a potentially awesome artifact because it's a poisoned 2 weapon, and it's a blast or a template. And so if you stick this on the right unit, it's gonna surprise the heck out of someone, and it's got some use. So let's say you put it on a Trigon Prime or a Hive Tyrant, someone who's going to be in your opponent's deployment zone. When they get charged, the Wall of Death is going to wound on a 2+, which you can just say that. Your opponent says, do you have any template weapons? You say, yeah, I'm going to Wall of Death you, and I wound on a 2+. That can actually make people choose not to assault you. Even though the best you can do is wound 3 guys with that Wall of Death, they may choose not to. Being able to template, though, with a 2+ wound is pretty good, when you're not Wall of Deathing, when you're just templating with it. The Yingarl factor, the fact that you could get a 2+ armor save when in close combat with that on your Hive Tyrant or your Trigon Prime or your Tyranid Prime, that's pretty awesome, actually. It lets you survive a round. And then, you boost your strength or your attacks later on so that you get a tremendous number of attacks, and then you slaughter your opponent. And then the Reaper is that weapon that gives you the extra strength and shred, and I think this is a pretty cool weapon for something that is going to get in close combat. I'm not sure I'd put it on a Hive Tyrant, because I think Hive Tyrants die too quickly to really benefit from it, but I think the Trigon Prime and potentially the Tyranid Prime, depending on how you run him, would benefit from it.